at the time that she had another idea for what I should do with this article. I just wasn't sure. I wanted to know what that other idea might be. But weeks went by, I didn't hear anything, so I figured, well, this is all gone, dead and buried, forget about it. And then a few weeks ago, I guess we had a meeting here at Good Shepherd, a long meeting about stewardship, and that's when she looked at me and said, I got a good idea. And I said, what? And the idea was that I should speak to what I had written in one of these temple talks. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Here's what I wrote right here, in case you think I'm making this up. Here's the article. It's in my pocket. That's the only place it's going to go. The title of what I wrote was called Managing God's Stuff. It'll become clear later on why it was called that, so just hold your questions. And I started out this piece that I wrote by making a confession, which I'll now get to do in front of the entire church. This is just really great. So here's my confession. I have always had a difficult time. I've always found it uncomfortable to talk about money. And I have particularly found it uncomfortable to talk about money within the confines of a church, which, as you might imagine, poses a dilemma if you happen to be a church treasurer. Now, it has become a little bit easier for me to do that, and I'll explain the reasons why, but it has always posed a bit of a challenge for me. And I suppose much of this has to do with my upbringing. I had a lot of the standard lessons you get when you're a kid. Money is the root of all evil. Greed is a sin. My mother was very strict with us in church, and she made it very clear that any discussion about money, don't talk about money, don't think about money, don't even look at money when you were in a church. You were supposed to blot it right out of your mind. So the point is, I grew up kind of conditioned, hardwired. Whenever I walked into a church, it sort of blot out money from my mind. Not the life I have now. That worked. And actually, it worked very well for me as I got into adulthood because I ended up pursuing a business career. I was in the publishing business for about 30 years. And during that time, I worked for a couple of small private companies. I also worked for some public corporations. And the one thing you know, all companies, big or small, private or public, they have one thing. They do one thing. They're supposed to make money. That's what they do. Show me a company that's not making any money, I'll show you a company that's not going to be around very long. So my job became, especially as my career went on, making money. Had a singular focus to it, maximizing profitability. So my life became this avalanche of profit and loss statements and balance sheets and cash flow statements and sales reports and inventory reports and bad debt reports. I had reports up the wazoo. And somehow, no matter what report I was looking at, the numbers that were supposed to be big were never big enough. The numbers that were supposed to be small were always too big. And it becomes this incredible grind, and a very unpleasant grind at a certain point. And you know, people talk about how your head starts spinning. I would get into work, and emails are coming in, and people are barging in your office, and the phone is ringing all the time, and you're late for a meeting, and you're late with a report, and you're late to go to the bathroom, and the head starts spinning, right? And I'd go through that 5 days a week, and by the time you get to the end of the week, your head is spinning so fast you think it's going to come right off your shoulders. But something marvelous would happen on Sunday mornings. I'd get to church, sit down in a pew, take a deep breath, and the spinning stopped. The old conditioning kicked in. It was as if my mother was staring down at me from the sky up above saying, don't you even dare think about profit margins right now. You're in church. Okay, Mom. So imagine my surprise, if you will, when I got to Good Shepherd in the summer of 2015, and money was a major topic of discussion. Or to be more precise, in Good Shepherd's case, it was not money so much as the lack thereof. And imagine my even more profound surprise when a couple months later I was asked if I would consider becoming the treasurer at Good Shepherd. Something I said I would do for a few months, by the way. You know. That worked out. So that nice, neat, clean, compartmentalized world I had maintained, in which money was something you just don't talk about in church, completely blew up on me. So I went in search of something to help me with that, in search of some intellectual rationalization, some spiritual structure, something to help me come to terms with this conflict that I felt about putting money in churches together and stewardship together and all that kind of stuff. Really couldn't find anything. Then a few months later, I ran across an article on stewardship, very, very short article as it turns out, where the guy says, the author says, he could define the essence of stewardship in 10 words or less. Here's what he said. God owns it all anyhow, we just manage his stuff. That was his statement, which is a kind of an inelegant statement. When it sounds like something a teenager would say, hey, get your hands off my stuff, man. But when you think about it, it kind of nails it, right? I mean, as Christians, what we believe is that we're all on our way to someplace else. We're only on this life for a certain amount of time. I hope I see you all on the other side. Don't know if I'm going to make it, but I hope I get there. But when you leave, you don't own anything anymore. You can't possibly own anything anymore. So when if you're like me, you have a will. When I pass on, my wife's going to get all my stuff. She doesn't want it, but she's going to get it. And then when she passes on, our kids get all our stuff. And then many, many years from now, somebody else will get all my stuff when they pass on. Except by that time, all my stuff is so old and crappy, nobody's going to want it anyhow. So, but the point is, you don't own anything permanently. In perpetuity, God owns it all. And that's a different way of looking at things than I've looked at before. And that's certainly a different way of looking at things when I was certainly in the business world. And if you think about it that way, it kind of changes the whole question of stewardship, for me anyhow. I'll make an I statement. It changes the whole question of stewardship, the whole question of money. The central question becomes this: how much of the stuff that I have now, that's really God's stuff, but how much of that stuff that I have now do I actually need to hold on to for a while? Because you got to get through a secular life, right? So you need a certain amount of money. You got to have a house. You got to have a car because you got to get to the job to make the money to pay for the house. So you need all that stuff. But there's some other stuff you might not need anymore. And if you don't need it, then the question becomes, can you give it back to God? Because it's his stuff, not yours. And at that point, then you have another question. Well, if you're going to give something back to God, how do you do that? I mean, you can't just wire the money or anything like that. And the answer, I think, is pretty obvious. You give it back to some place that's doing God's work. And for my money, and literally for my money, this is the place. All you have to do is look at that insert and see the number of things going on at Good Shepherd right now in terms of ministry activities. I'll tell you right now, there are churches twice the size of this church that aren't doing half the work. So from my standpoint, it's been an honor and a privilege to be part of that. I'm excited by that, and to perhaps contribute in some small way to it. So when I think about stewardship now, yeah, it's a two-part question. How much can I give up? And then the second part is easy. It's going to go here. That's the way it's going to be. I think if perhaps you think about stewardship that way, it will at that point become maybe an easier conversation and for you as well. So let me finish with one more story because I know I'm getting tedious. Years ago, 25 years ago, I had a boss, and he would have these sort of monthly management meetings, and you'd get into, these would be all-day meetings, and you get into this room, and you're sitting around talking about capital projects that the company was considering or implementing, or you're talking about new business development directions the company was taking, or you're even talking about the possibility of acquiring another company. But the common theme, the recurring theme through all those conversations is that you'd be sitting around the table and you're talking literally about spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars. My old boss would get up and he would say that we should always remember that when we were having these kind of conversations, what we were really talking about is the possibility of spending somebody else's money, other people's money, the shareholders' money. but that we ought to approach decisions like that with every bit as much care, every bit as much rigor as we would as if it was our own money. And that's something that stayed with me throughout my career in business. Well, my days of even indirect shareholder accountability are behind me. I don't report to a board of directors anymore. Instead, I now consider that I report to a higher authority, and he can be a pretty tough boss, but tough but fair. And in point of fact, of course, we all report to this higher authority. And in the coming weeks ahead, as we get into discussions here at Good Shepherd about stewardship, you know, I now kind of look forward to those conversations. I don't dread them, I look forward to it. And I think to myself that I'm sure within those conversations, I have every faith that together we'll be able to figure out what is it that the boss wants us to do and how best can we manage this stuff. Thank you.
The bulletin insert that Wayne was referring to is this one, which has on the front an article that you received by e-news. If you receive our e-news, introducing our stewardship appeal and some of the unique parts about it this year. And the second bullet insert talks about how we have been multiplying our mission, our ministries towards adults. Just a few pictures of the things that have been started in the last couple of years. It's worth a trip down memory lane, I think so. So I encourage you to read and look at your bulletin inserts. With that, let us continue with our readings. Hi. Go for it.